You've been in this conversation before. You're sitting across from someone, maybe a coworker, a distant friend, someone you genuinely wanted to connect with, and you're talking. You're using words, you're nodding, you might even be smiling. But nothing is actually being said. You're circling the same three topics: work, the weather, a show you're both half watching. And underneath all of it, there's this quiet pull, this almost physical urge to say something real, something that actually costs you something to admit. But you don't, and neither do they. Most people blame themselves for this. They think they're boring or awkward or bad at conversation. But that's not it. The reason this keeps happening, across every party, every first date, every networking event, is mathematical. You are trapped inside a game, and until you understand the game, you can't escape it. Welcome to the social chessboard. In 1950, two Rand Corporation mathematicians named Merrill Flood and Melvin Drescher discovered something disturbing about rational decision-making. They called it the prisoner's dilemma. Two people, separated, can't communicate. Each must choose, cooperate or betray. If both cooperate, both win a little. If both betray, both lose. But if one cooperates while the other betrays, the betrayer wins big. The cooperator walks away with nothing but regret. Here's the uncomfortable part. Every social interaction you have runs on this exact logic. You have two moves available at any moment in a conversation. The social payoff matrix. Both go deep. Real connection. The kind that makes you drive home thinking about it. Rare. Worth it. Both. Stay shallow. Safe. Forgettable. Nobody gets hurt. Nobody grows. Status quo maintained. You go deep, they stay shallow. The cringe outcome. You've handed them something real. They handed you a weather update. You stay shallow, they go deep. You're safe, they're exposed. You feel slightly guilty. The connection dies before it begins. That burning discomfort when you overshare and get nothing back. Game theorists have a name for it. They call it the sucker's payoff. And your brain has been trained since childhood to avoid it at almost any cost. In 1950, a 22-year-old mathematician named John Nash proved something that would eventually win him a Nobel Prize and explain your last 10 awkward conversations. He showed that in any strategic interaction, there's a point called the Nash Equilibrium. It's the state where neither player can improve their outcome by changing only their own move, assuming the other player stays put. Small talk is that equilibrium. If I think there's even a 40% chance you'll stay shallow, the mathematically safe move for me is to stay shallow too. Not because I want to, not because I think you're shallow, but because the downside of being wrong, the sucker's payoff, is too painful to risk on someone I haven't verified yet. And here's the trap. You're running the same calculation, on me. So we both default to safe. We both perform a version of ourselves that can't be hurt. And we both walk away vaguely disappointed, wondering why it's so hard to meet people we actually connect with. It's not hard. It's Nash optimal, which is a much more depressing explanation. There's another layer here that makes this worse. It comes from biology. Biologists and economists use something called signaling theory to explain how living things communicate credibility. A peacock's tail is the classic example. It's enormous, it's absurd, it actively makes the peacock worse at surviving. And that's precisely the point. Only a genuinely healthy peacock can afford to carry it. The cost is the proof. Real conversation works the same way. When you say something honest, something that reveals a real fear, a real opinion, a real part of how you see the world, you're sending an expensive signal. You've put something on the table that can be judged, mocked, or simply ignored. Small talk is the opposite. It's a cheap signal. It costs nothing. It reveals nothing. It's conversational filler, the NPC dialogue of human interaction. And because most of us are unconsciously scanning for expensive signals from other people, proof that they're worth opening up to, we find ourselves stuck in an infinite loop of cheap ones, both waiting for the other person to go first, both refusing to carry the box. This is what loneliness actually is. Not the absence of people, the absence of anyone willing to pay the cost. Here's what game theorists discovered when they ran the prisoner's dilemma repeatedly with the same players, instead of just once. Cooperation emerges, not because people suddenly became altruistic, but because in a repeated game, betrayal has consequences. The other player remembers, they adjust, and over many rounds, the most successful long-term strategy turns out to be one called tit for tat. Start cooperative, then mirror whatever the other person does. The problem with most social interactions is that we treat them as one-shot games. A networking event, a party full of strangers, a first date. We assume we'll never see this person again, or if we do, we assume the stakes are too high to risk early on, so we never defect, and we never fully cooperate. We hover in the middle, doing this strange performative dance that satisfies no one. The people who seem effortlessly magnetic, who always seem to leave conversations having actually connected, aren't more charismatic than you. They're running a different game theory strategy. They treat even one-shot interactions as the first move of a longer game. They invest early, and they accept, consciously, that sometimes they'll lose that bet. So how do you actually change this? You don't blow up the game, you change your opening move. The goal isn't to unload your deepest fears on a stranger at a work event. That's not vulnerable, it's destabilizing. It gives the other person no room to respond, and it breaks the incremental logic of trust building. That's not breaking the Nash Equilibrium. That's just making people uncomfortable in a different direction. What actually works is what I'd call a medium signal. A move that's slightly more expensive than small talk, but not so costly that it triggers the other person's social defense mechanisms. Cheap versus medium versus expensive signals. Instead of asking, "How are you?" which invites, "Good, thanks, you?" Try, "What's something you've been thinking about lately that you haven't talked about much?" Medium cost signals openness, gives them permission to be interesting. "I've been noticing I feel oddly anxious whenever I finish a big project. Does that ever happen to you?" You go first, but just barely. Low enough risk to be safe, high enough signal to be real. You're not dumping your soul on the table. You're showing them one card to see if they want to play a different kind of game. This is called the credible first move, and it works because it changes the math. It proves you're a cooperator. It lowers their perceived risk, and it gives them permission, which most people are quietly, desperately waiting for, to stop performing. Here's the thing about the prisoner's dilemma that most people miss when they first learn it. The game doesn't reward the smartest player. It rewards the player who creates conditions for the other person to trust them. Every shallow conversation you've ever had wasn't a failure of chemistry. It was two rational agents making individually logical decisions that produced a collectively terrible outcome. That happens constantly in economics, in politics, in environmental policy. It happens every day at dinner tables and office parties and first dates. The math isn't on your side. But the math isn't the point. The person across from you, whoever they are, is almost certainly running the same quiet calculation you are. They want to say something real. They're afraid of the sucker's payoff. They've been disappointed before by people who didn't catch the signal. Someone has to go first. Someone has to absorb the short-term risk of being the cooperator in a room full of people pretending they don't want to cooperate. The question isn't whether you're capable of that. The question is whether you're willing to stop playing to not lose and start playing to actually win. Most people never do, and that, more than anything else, is why the room stays quiet.